All right. So now that we know how to keep ourselves out of crippling debt, let's talk about how we're going to actually grow some wealth. So the first thing we need to talk about is inflation. Here's a online inflation calculator that compares the buying power of money at different points in time in America. So right now I'm just putting it in January 2025 and we're going to compare the buying power to 1965. So right now, if you have $2, you can go buy a candy bar. So I looked it up. It's roughly $2 on average right now for a candy bar. So if we calculate that out, you would have needed 20 cents. So a quarter would have easily bought you a candy bar back in 1965. And the reason why a quarter no longer buys you a candy bar is because of inflation. So another example of inflation is, say back in 1965, you wanted to store enough money away for your grandkids to be able to buy a new car. So let's say today a new car, let's just be really conservative and say we just want our grandkids to be able to buy a cheap vehicle for college, 20,000 bucks for a new cheap, let's say base model Civic or something like that. So how much money would that have been back in 1965? So 2,000 bucks would have bought you a brand new car of the equivalent roughly as $20,000 today. Here is a nice chart. I have this linked in the description also that shows you the inflation per year historically. This is really important when it comes to investing because if you have any money sitting around in an account doing nothing, it is literally losing this amount of value every year roughly. And if your investment isn't making you at least this much, you're actually ultimately just losing buying power over time. Just like the grandparents that wanted to buy their grandkids a car and stashed away $2,000 back in 1965. So now that we have a better idea of how inflation works, we can go back to our budgeting example that we used previously. So we have our basic budget and we have our income. The initial steps you have to do is to build a budget so you know what you're working with and get your income greater than your bills, like we had talked about before. Once you get that accomplished, now you can actually start working with this extra investment line down here and start seeing what you can work with. So, first step is definitely pretty obvious, but it's to pay your mandatory bills and your necessities here. Then we now know that any extra money that's just sitting in our account is just going to be losing value over time. So we need to do something else with it instead. This is where opening a stock trading or brokerage account comes in. I currently use Charles Schwab. Seems to work out just fine. The app is easy to use. I was able to link my regular bank account very easily to it. Just click open account, go through the process. Then a handful of days, you'll have it set up and ready to go. And that's where we will use our money to actually invest with this extra investments. So the first step is to build 3 months of reserve funds. That'll actually get you built up to where you can handle the unexpected because it always happens, whether it's your car breaking down, emergency medical bill, something along those lines. Some people actually go up to 6 months, but depending on how much investment you have every month, 3 months is still a huge feat because in this example, 3 months pay is $9,000. And if you're only doing $100 a month, it's going to take you a while. But absolutely critical to have this to be able to not lose your ability to continue to make money by having your car break down or something along those lines. So, first step, build 3 months reserve fund. We'll talk about what this SGov is here in a minute. And if you spend it, replenish it. Next step is to pay off those 7% plus interest debt items that you might have that we talked about. Hopefully, you never even got into these, but if you did, you got to get out from under those. I personally would struggle probably even building the 3 months reserve while having this 7% interest, but that's a personal call. And then lastly, once you get all your 7% plus interest debt paid off, you can actually start looking at long-term investing. The actual best thing to do at this point, if you have extra money and you've got all your debt paid off of 7% or higher, is to check with your employer and see if they have a retirement benefit where they match how much you put in. So, for example, my job, they will match up to 5%. So, if I put 5% of my income in, they will match it and put another 5% of my income in every month to that retirement account. That's essentially free money. So, that would be your best bet right off the bat. The next best thing to do, though, if you've maxed that out or if you don't have an employer match, is to look at long term investments such as VOO. So there's two ways to invest in the stock market. There's as a method of gambling, and then there's actually a slow, gradual development of wealth. And generally speaking, the more diversified your stock purchases are, the safer your investment will be. One way to do that is to go and buy individual stocks, hundreds and hundreds of them, so that you have your money spread about around all different companies to really diversify where you've got your money in. So if one company goes under or even 10 companies go under, it's not that big of a damage to you. And the more companies you purchase, the more you're investing in the overall stock market as a whole. Or you can buy what they call ETFs. ETFs are essentially just when you buy a single stock of an ETF, you're actually buying a small piece of hundreds of stocks, generally speaking. So VOO, for example, is all of the S&P 500, which are the top 500 roughly companies in America. And so all you have to do is buy the stock VOO. And when you do that, you're actually buying tiny little pieces of the top 500 companies in America. So it's a nice, easy way to diversify. And for example, in this article, we can see that according to a report, a 3-year investment horizon, 80% of large cap fund managers failed to outperform the S&P 500. That means over 80% of all the major fund managers that are paid to manage and other people's investments, over 80% of them failed to outperform just the S&P 500 in general. So if you just invest in the S&P 500, you're beating over 80% of those. And in a 15-year period, that number actually went up to 88% you'd be beating. So very nice, safe, stable, historically speaking, way to accumulate slow, gradual, reliable wealth is through the S&P 500, and in this case, VOO. So we can just go onto our stock brokerage account and buy shares of VOO for any long-term investment needs that we want. And one of the best parts about VOO is when we compare it to the average inflation rate, we can find here that the return, the average S&P 500 VOO has a return of about 10.3% per year or 6.37% after inflation. So we are actually getting a over 6% per year growth in our money after inflation. So this is how we can actually get our $2,000 in 1965 to easily accumulate up to beyond $20,000 that we need in 2025 for our grandkids to buy a new car. Now, the other one that I mentioned is this SGov for our 3-month reserve fund. So what is SGov? SGov is government bonds, which is essentially one of the safest investments you can have. And right now, it's currently yielding as high as a high yield savings account. So it's like 5% right now. It's an extremely safe investment, and you can just park your money in there for any cash instead of just having your cash sit there and depreciate due to inflation. It'll sit here and at least maintain its value, if not slowly grow value instead of sitting there. So with these two stocks, that's all we need. And I don't recommend purchasing any other stocks other than these two until you really understand what you're doing. And just a reminder, as we had mentioned earlier, that even 80% of the professionals can't even beat it over a 15-year period. So you might even just want to stick to these, to be honest. So to summarize, build a budget, make sure your income's higher than your bills, open up a stock trading brokerage account, build up 3 months of reserve fund by buying SGov inside of it, pay off your 7% interest debt, and then start investing into your employer match and VOO or some other S&P 500 ETF. And if that's all you do, you will slowly and gradually develop and accumulate wealth.